Well, greetings. Week 19, and there's more to the story. We talked about the thief on the cross, with thief on the cross saying, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus said, today you'll be with me in paradise. We talked about that on Sunday, but there's more to the story in terms of how Jesus got there. And I want to talk with you today a little bit about Pilate and his role in the story. One of the interesting things about Pilate is that every time we say the creed, the Apostles' Creed, the Nicene Creed, we say suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, died, and was buried. Suffered under Pontius Pilate. Every Sunday when we say the creed, we talk about Mary, we talk about Jesus, but we also talk about one of the villains, Pontius Pilate. Why do we talk about one of the villains in the creed? Why do we mention Pontius Pilate every time we have worship? Well, I think it's for two reasons. One, it's kind of a simple one, to cement the event of Jesus in human history, in secular human history. Pontius Pilate is a verifiable leader of the Jews at that time. And so you can look at a history book and you can see that he was there. So it, for one, identifies Jesus in public secular history. But I think another reason is because Pontius Pilate sometimes is kind of like us. And the reason I say that, stick with me on this, the reason I say that is, have you ever thought to yourself, I really shouldn't say this, but, and then you say it? Have you ever thought to yourself, I know I really shouldn't do this, but, and then you end up doing it? Have you ever thought, that's not what I intended to do, but you ended up doing it anyway? Sometimes we do what we don't mean to do, what we don't mean to say, what we don't intend to do, but there's a but there, but we end up doing it anyway. So in that way, Pontius Pilate didn't mean to be a part of the death of Jesus, but he was. He didn't mean to. He should have said something else, but he didn't. He didn't intend to send Jesus to the cross, but he did. So think of this. Pontius Pilate was the Roman governor of Judea. He was a rising political star. As governor of Judea, he was one step away from the Roman Senate, and all that stood in the way of him becoming a Roman senator was how he succeeded in ruling over Judea as the Roman governor. In the early years of Jesus' ministry, Pilate had no reason to criticize Jesus or worry that he was a threat. When Jesus was within Pilate's jurisdiction, Jesus caused a stir mostly among the Jewish leaders, the priests and the Pharisees. So Pilate kind of saw him as harmless to the Roman state. The Jesus thing, he thought, was only a thing of passing interest, and it didn't threaten Roman security and its grip over the area. So he thought, well, no big deal. But Caiaphas had the Jewish leaders arrest Jesus during the festival on unleavened bread, during the Passover. And he was in Jerusalem. The Jewish leaders put Jesus through a speedy trial, and they, from the Jewish perspective, sentenced Jesus to death for claiming to be the Messiah. You have read about that in chapter 26. There were no civil or political reasons to say Jesus had to be put to death. That had to come from the Roman authorities. For that, they needed Pilate. Pilate was the only Roman leader. I think I said on Friday he was Jewish. Pontius Pilate was, of course, the Roman governor. Pilate was the only Roman leader who could execute a death penalty for Jesus for civil or political reasons. So the Jewish people accused Jesus of subversion to the government, of refusing to pay taxes, and of claiming to be king of the Jews. It was for those civil and religious and political reasons that they brought Jesus to Pilate, because on religious grounds the Jewish leaders couldn't put Jesus to death. It needed to be a Roman civil legal death sentence. So what's interesting is that in the Gospel of John, the trial before Pilate takes a whole chapter. John's Gospel is only 24 chapters. The trial before Pilate takes a whole chapter between the middle of 18 and the middle of 19. One whole chapter in John's story. I mean, at the beginning of chapter 18, Judas betrays Jesus. At the middle of chapter 18 through the middle of 19, Jesus is before Pilate. At the end of chapter 19, Jesus is crucified. So you see, Pilate occupies half of John's story between the betrayal from Judas and the death of Jesus. Pretty major stuff. Now, there are 7 scenes in the story of the trial before Pilate. In scene 1, Jesus is brought before Pilate and charges are made. Pilate says, I would need to pass you back to the Jewish leaders and judge him according to Jewish law, but they refuse. In scene 2, Pilate says to Jesus, are you king of the Jews? This is all in the reading, which would be a reason for Pilate to judge him. But Jesus made no answer, remember? In scene 3, Pilate tries to get Jesus released by asking the Jewish people whether they wanted them to release Barabbas or Jesus. Pilate hopes that they're going to choose Barabbas, to crucify Barabbas, but instead they say, no, release Jesus. So they free Barabbas, which kept Jesus on trial. He didn't mean it to happen. He tried to make other ways, but nothing else worked. So he kind of tried, but it didn't work. I intended to do it, but. In scene 4, Pilate has Jesus flogged, hoping that the violent punishment would be sufficient, but his plan fails and his options start to slip through his fingers. In scene 5, Pilate presents Jesus to them and he says, I find no reason for the crucifixion of Jesus. Pilate doesn't want to have Jesus crucified, but he intended to get him off. But in scene 6, Pilate hands him over, and Pilate becomes complicit and guilty in the death of Jesus. He meant to get him off, but he didn't. In scene 7, Pilate is reminded that his first priority is his loyalty to the Roman Empire, and he surrenders Jesus to the Romans to have him crucified. The drama is complete. An innocent man is condemned to death. Pilate didn't mean to do it in those 7 scenes, but he ended up doing it. So what then became of Pilate? His career faltered and failed. His wife turned against him. In fact, it's likely that Pilate's wife, who had the dream saying, let him go, likely that she became a Christian. In the midst of the trial of Jesus, Pilate was sitting on the judgment seat. His wife sent a note saying, have nothing to do with this innocent man, for I had a dream last night and I suffered much on account of him. Pilate didn't intend to crucify Jesus, but he had a major hand in it. So we say suffered under Pontius Pilate, was crucified, died, and was buried. 2 reasons. One, to cement him in political, secular history, the message of Jesus. But second, because he's a lot like us. We intend to pray more. We intend to go to church more. We intend to walk closer to Christ in all that we say and do. We intend to do that, but sometimes we just fail in our attempts. None of them as catastrophic as Pilate, but the same tendency is something that we have. So Pilate tried to avoid taking personal responsibility, tried to manipulate the situation and assert his own blamelessness and innocence. Pilate never learned that you never do wrong when you do the right thing. You never do wrong when you do the right thing, no matter how difficult it is. Never learned that you never regret taking the high road. Never ever regret taking the high road. He didn't do the next right thing. He didn't take the high road. And because he didn't, Pilate really put his own spirit to death along with Jesus, who was blameless and innocent. It's easy to be a Pilate. It's easy to do that. Easy to take the easy way out. Easier not to take the high road. Easier not to do the next right thing. But don't be a Pilate. Let the Spirit of Jesus live in you and guide you to do what you know is the next right thing. Jesus, keep me near the cross. There, a precious fountain, free to all, a healing stream flows from Calvary's mountain. Let that be your prayer, your thought, your commitment as we go through the next phase of the story. Great to be with you today. Keep on reading. We'll look at the road to Emmaus next week. That's chapter 27, so that's the resurrection of Jesus. Keep reading, keep coming to church, keep watching the blog, and I will see you again soon. Bye-bye.